All right, it's 10 o'clock. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning in the very first of our parent coaching series on helping children thrive through COVID, where we'll be covering different topics, and we really want to talk about how we can be supporting our children during this time of change. My name is Dr. Shauna Miller. I'm a school psychologist at the Mico Care Center, Child Assessment and Research and Education Center A school psychologist, for those who may not know, is a child psychologist who has some training in the factors that affect children's learning and school performance. So I'll be one of your presenters over the next 4 weeks. The other presenter will be Ms. Shalika Matthews. Shalika?
Hi, good morning, everyone. We are expecting more persons to come on, but we wanted to start on time because we scheduled for 10 and that's our commitment to you that we're gonna start on time. So in general, I am Shalika Matthews. I'm an associate clinical psychologist. So I've been working with children predominantly for the last 7 years at the care center as well as other agencies. And essentially our goal is to just help you have as much information and as much tools as possible to help your children navigate what is an uncertain time.
So we both work at Mico Care. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the center, but we're an agency that has been around for 40 years. And we work primarily with children with special education needs, identifying children who have needs and making recommendations to parents and teachers and how to help them. And then we also do some intervention and some training as well. We really wanted to keep this series short, a small group so that we can be more interactive and collaborative. We want to be able to hear from you about what are some of your specific concerns and questions that you might want us to address today or in future sessions. So we want to get a chance to hear from you. And actually, I want to try having you maybe introduce yourselves. I can see on screen your username, so I'm just going to say your name, and if you can just give a quick, like, my name is, and how many children you might have or what their ages are, if that's okay with everyone. You'll have to unmute. If you're unfamiliar with the Zoom, there is a microphone looking button, and if it has the red mark through it, it means that you're muted. So before you speak, you'll have to unmute. I'll start with Teresa, if that's okay. Teresa?
Hi, good morning. Yes, I'm Teresa Thompson. I have 3 children, 15, 12, almost 13, and a 4-year-old.
A wide range right there. Morning, Teresa.
Yeah.
Right.
Good morning.
Karen?
If you don't have a mic, I'm monitoring the chat, so you can just type in the chat and I'll read it out for you guys.
Yeah, good, right. I know some people don't necessarily have a mic attached to their computer, so what about the person who's listed as home? Are you able to share your name and how many children you might have and what their ages are? All right, anything in the chat so far, Shalika?
Not regarding that information.
And Franklin, if you're there and are able to share, introduce yourself. All right, well, like Shalika said, if you can type in the chat and give us information, and actually we're gonna ask you to type your concerns or questions that you might have right now in the chat, because we're going to talk about it in a little bit. So any kind of concerns or questions that you really want to address, we're asking if you can type it in the chat. Shalika will be monitoring it and we'll kind of talk about it in a little bit. I'm going to just give an overview of what we will be doing over the next 4 weeks. So this morning, we're going to be talking about establishing some basic foundations, some stabilizing strategies to help our children be more resilient. So putting in place things like rules and routines and being very positive and proactive with our children. Next week, Shalika is going to be addressing how to foster independence in our children, which we know is going to be very key right now as kids are home. and they're going to need more self-management tools. So next week, Shalika is going to be addressing how we can be fostering that in our children. And the third week, I'll be talking about how to help our kids meet the emotional demands of this time. It's a challenging time for all of us, and how we ourselves can keep emotionally regulated and help our children become more emotionally regulated and resilient. And in the final week, Shalika is going to talk about how we can put in some long-term strategies to maintain success. So as we go along, we're going to be talking about different strategies. The idea is that we will practice some of the things that we talk about from week to week, and share the following week, and maybe talk about some ways that we can support you. And then at the end, we'll talk about how we can maintain some of the success that we may have achieved over time. Shalika's just going to talk about some ground rules for engagement as we go along.
All right, morning again, everyone. As you would have been able to garner, we're very much shooting for an interactive session where you guys share what's going on. And because of that level of disclosure and the type of disclosure we're just asking everyone really to help us create a non-judgmental space where people feel okay to share. I know it's a little bit daunting when you can't see the face of the person that you're in the space with, but we're asking everyone to just make the commitment that, you know, what happens here stays here in terms of the disclosures that people share. We welcome you to take the knowledge that you gain to share it with persons in your circle to help others develop better skills to navigate what they're going through, as well as just we ask for your participation. You know, say what's going on so that we can help you as best as we can.
So to start off with, we really want to hear from you. What are some of the concerns that you guys might have? If anyone wants to, feel free to kind of share some of the challenges that you've been facing with COVID-19 and the changes, and with school being out and trying to parent. What are some of the things that you are facing right now that you kind of want to try to figure out? No one has concerns?
Okay, Franklin says dealing with kids on different levels, for instance, autism, one of his concerns. Or
yes, yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Thank you for sharing that, Franklin, and we can adjust what we talk about to address some of that. Anybody else have any other concerns that they will kind of, you know, are hoping to hear some ideas about? All right, I'll give people space for maybe another 30 seconds and then we'll move on if nobody else has any other comments. But feel free to type in the chat as we go along. Because again, we really want to hear from you and kind of tailor it to what you might be looking for and what you might need.
okay, another concern raised is making provisions for kids with underlying issues in terms of learning within a new norm.
Yeah, definitely a challenge. I'm sorry, was somebody trying to speak a while ago or no?
I didn't hear anything.
Okay. All right, so some of the challenges that are being faced by parents, I mean, globally right now, considering that this is a global pandemic, is that there has been a lot of change for all of us, right? So our schedules are totally disrupted. We can't rely on some of the everyday routines that we, normally kind of navigate our day to day. Children in school, we have work. All of that has changed. For some of us, our jobs have changed if we're fortunate to still have jobs. I mean, there's been change in how we do things, how we get things done outside of work. Our children have been home since March, which means, I mean, I'm sure most of them love being home, of course, and not having to go to school. But at the same time, we all really do well with a sense of predictability. So even though I'm sure they love being home, it's hard to adjust to not having the same kind of schedule that you've had before. And even more so for children who are older, and a couple of you mentioned having older children. Teenagers really thrive on social interaction. And it's been really, I'm sure it's a challenge for them not to be able to see their friends on a day-to-day basis, and feeling more isolated. Also, there's the changes in our public social behavior has changed, and the expectations have changed around that. So, trying to get our kids to know that they shouldn't run up and hug people in public, to make sure that they know that they have to keep their masks on. Again, and particularly, as Franklin mentioned, for children with autism who do not do well with changes to routine, it's really hard to reinforce the new norms that need to happen. And for all of us, I mean, there's an increased sense of stress about how to manage all of this. We know that there's been an increase in symptoms of anxiety and depression and anger issues in children. So there really are a number of challenges that we're facing, that parents are facing, and trying to figure out how can we best, even not acknowledging the changes that are happening, and that is difficult, but at the same time, how can we best support our children and help them to make progress and move forward, even in the midst of all of this disruption. And so that's really what we want to kind of talk about today. One of the key things that we want to emphasize moving forward is the importance of consistency. So I'll talk about some 3 key ideas this week. We'll talk about different strategies as we go along over the weeks. But the most important thing is to try to figure out whatever change or strategy that you think might be helpful for you. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, whatever change or our strategy that you want to implement, it's really important to be consistent in that change and trying to think through what is going to be required to put this strategy into place, make a plan for it, like detail what is going to be involved, what do I need to have, how do I need to put this into place, how can I remind myself to put this strategy into place, who can kind of help me with accountability. All those things are really important because for change to occur, we need to be consistent. So whatever we talk about, I want you to keep in mind that consistency is going to be very key in making changes for children. Okay, so one of the first, so I'm going to talk about 3 key ideas, and keeping it positive and being proactive, making expectations clear, and putting a routine into place. And all of these ideas might seem, kind of maybe a little bit obvious, but I really want to emphasize that these ideas are coming from decades of research about what is effective for helping kids be resilient and making changes for children. So these, if you put them into place, they really help a great deal, okay? The first idea of how to help our kids be more resilient, right, and manage their emotions and manage their behavior and be independent. One of the first and important strategies is to have a very strong and secure relationship with your child, because from that security, children are better able to act in a positive way. So much like any of our relationships that we have, if you think of our friendships, we really need to maintain a lot of positive interaction with our friends to strengthen that relationship. If we, when we hang out and have fun with our friends, friendships become better. Or even with our partners, the more that we have positive time is the stronger the relationship with. Same so for our children. They really need to have consistent positive interaction to maintain a strong positive relationship. I mean, we know that, I know that you guys love your children, that's sure, for sure. But there is a way to strengthen that relationship so that they feel secure, so that they're able to act positively. One of the ways that I try to talk about this with parents is I like to have parents think about one of the worst teachers or managers or bosses that you've ever had. If you, for a second, if you kind of just think about somebody who was a really horrible person to work for, or a horrible teacher to have, you hated their class. And if people want to maybe give an adjective or two of what that person was like, if you think of one of the worst managers, one of the worst teachers that you've ever had, what kind of a person was that person, or what made them a terrible boss? Anyone?
Well, I know for me, persons who, micromanage things, or they don't really allow you to try, and they want you to do things exactly how they want to do without giving you some room to figure out how to do it yourself. A challenge. It has been a challenge. Anyone else?
So often when I talk to parents about this idea of somebody who was a bad teacher for them, as Shalika mentions, it's people who are either unclear or micromanaging or very harsh and demanding without setting clear expectations. It's sort of somebody who's sort of like very negative, like you're not really sure what they want, or they're asking for too much. So if we think of a bad manager, they're often going to that role of sort of being a little bit too demanding or a little too harsh, or you just don't feel supported by that person. And if you think about how you work for such an individual, if you had a teacher like that was really critical, often we end up sort of doing just the bare minimum for that person, or sometimes we might not do the work that we intended to do, or we kind of brush them off altogether, because it's very hard to produce good work for people that we think are not on our side, or that is sort of going to be too harsh or too critical or too demanding. On the other hand, I don't know if anybody has had a very good teacher, a teacher that they loved, or a manager that they really, really enjoyed having. And again, I'll give you a chance if anybody wants to share what that person was like. If you think of a really good teacher, a teacher that you loved a lot, or a manager that you just really appreciated. If anyone has had that experience and wants to give an adjective or two about what that person is like. Shalika, I see there's something in the chat. I'm not sure.
I'm not seeing anything.
Oh, okay. So generally, for people who might have had a good manager often, or a good teacher, you think of somebody who you feel very supported and respected by, somebody who really respects your opinion, maybe. Somebody who is very encouraging, right? They really feel that you can be doing really good work. Maybe they're very clear about what they need, very supportive. They might have very high standards, but you feel that you can meet those standards. And again, there's just a lot of positiveness in interaction is usually what you feel from somebody who's like a good manager or a good teacher, that you really feel respected and supported by that person. And again, if you think about how you might have done work for that person as opposed to the bad manager, is that often we feel like we can sort of push ourselves to the best of our ability, go above and beyond, really try really hard for that person. And it's just, all of us want that. We want to feel respected and supported, and we really do our best for people that we feel respected by, and it's the same for our children, that our children do well when they feel respected and supported. That's a key principle for them. I mean, they may know that you, of course, you love them and you feed them and you give them what they need, but when they feel that you are on their side and they feel like that you have their backs, they really put in their best efforts, and that's a really key foundation for resiliency for children. I want to talk about two quick ways that we can sort of practical that we can reinforce that feeling with our children. One of them is to actually spend consistent positive time with our kids. So especially for younger children, I really generally encourage parents to have a 5-minute playtime with their child. It doesn't have to be a very long time. 5 minutes is fine. But it has to be consistent. As we talked about before, consistency is key. If you have a regular play interactive time with your child, that really helps to build a relationship and help them to feel very, very supported. With older children, older than 10 and older, maybe it doesn't have to be every day, but at least 3 times a week, I would suggest having a one-on-one time with your child that is interactive and that is child directed, meaning going to this period asking questions. The children really get turned off by a whole lot of questions like, what are you doing? What do you like? What do you want to do? Don't do that. I would say just, do something that they like doing. Just kind of focus on what they want to do and spend that time with them. So that's one really strong way of building a strong relationship with your child, having a regular one-on-one time. The other way, and I want to say again, just keep that time about the child and not being critical and not making a lot of demands during that time. The other way that we can maintain a positive relationship with our child is to really focus on giving positive feedback for things that they're doing that you want them to do. This can be really hard. I think, I want to say culturally, but maybe across the board, it's hard for us to focus on the things that they're doing as opposed to focus on the things that they're not doing. So, if they pick up their toys, if they made their bed, if they shared with their sister, you really want to acknowledge that openly as opposed to like, oh, that's what they should be doing. But saying, oh, thanks for picking up your toys. Oh, you did a really good job making your bed this morning. Thanks for sharing with your sister. I really appreciate that. You really want to focus on switching your attention to positive actions as opposed to commenting on the things that they're not doing. Like, oh, why didn't you make up your bed? Oh, the toys are all over the place. You don't want to the more attention that you give to something is the more that action is likely to occur. So you want to focus on positive actions and making comments on the things that they're doing. I also want to say with feedback and praise that you really want to focus on actions more than traits. So focus on like, oh, I really like that you're working hard, or you sat down for 5 minutes, that was very good, as opposed to, oh, you're so smart, or you're so pretty. You really want to focus on things that they can repeat and actions that they can do over and over. And then if anybody has any thoughts on what I've said so far in terms of putting positive interactions into place, is that something that you think might be doable for you? We'll talk a little bit at the end for sure, much more so about how we can put some of these things into place. But anybody have any thoughts so far on what I've said? So, like I said, being positive and proactive is one of the ways that we can really help build resiliency in kids. The other thing that we're going to need to do, especially now that things have changed greatly, is how we can communicate really clear expectations for what is expected now. Before, school was school, home was home, and children had an idea of the rules at school. And for a lot of them, at home is a much freer time where you can sort of do what you want to do, except for maybe homework. But, there's not a lot of rules about what they have to do at home. Now, because they are learning at home, we really need to be intentional about communicating what the expectations should be. I mean, you guys have had the children home since March, so you know that there is a challenge in getting them to be, figure out how they should be working at home. And part of it is that we really need to figure out what the expectations are going to be for working at home and how to communicate that clearly. You need to start off definitely by having a discussion with them that school is now at home, and so there's going to have to be some changes and clear rules about what that means for what we are allowed to do or what we're not allowed to do during that time. So have a discussion, an open discussion about that things have to change and things will change. And so the freedoms that they had before are not going to be the same. Really think about what are the things that you want them to be doing. And for each person, that circumstance is going to be different depending on the child's abilities, and what the schools would be doing and what access you might have. But think about for your family, what are the things that you want to make sure that they will be doing, and what they can do and what they can't do. Think about the space that they'll be working in, and making rules clear about, what they should be allowed to do during that space, what times they'll be working, etc. So once you have an idea of the rules that are the expectations that need to be put into place, it's really a good idea to have those rules and expectations written down and to remind them often of those expectations. And I'll show you in a little bit what that might look like. But children need a lot of reminders. I mean, at school, they're able, over time, because it's so repetitive and it's the same, they have that kind of instilled. So at home, now that you're implementing new expectations, you're going to have to do a lot of reminding in the beginning about this is what's required, this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed. At the same time, I want to make sure that you're keeping those expectations realistic. Keeping in mind that, for example, it would be unrealistic to expect children to sit down for 5 hours in front of a computer, like as if they were at a desk job. That's not a realistic expectation for them. Again, we'll talk about communicating with schools, but having an idea of how long those periods are going to be, how much, when our activity is going to switch, how much movement is going to be needed, and kind of have a realistic idea of what kids should be expected to do. Also, for younger kids, of course, those times should be even shorter than for older kids who are a little bit more independent and have more regulation. You want to keep, once you have an idea of what the rules are, make sure that everybody's on the same page. That's going to be very key. Like, consistency is key, so having everybody on the same page is key. If grandma is going to be supervising the children sometimes, and older brother and uncle, whoever is going to be supervising what's happening, needs to understand what the expectations are so that everybody's on the same page. Children are often willing to manipulate the situation if they feel like people have different expectations. So make sure everybody's on the same page, have the expectations clear across the board, and everybody knows what is expected at different times. So the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of a key thing to put into place is having a predictable routine. This is definitely a challenge because I'm not sure if schools are sure of what their timetables are going to look like. But as much as possible, I think it's going to be a really good idea for at least for everyone to have an idea of what their week is going to look like. What's going to happen on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Have an idea for yourself about what is school doing, what are the times that schools would be doing online learning. If they switch to in-person, what times will that be? Is it a week on, week off basis? Is it a every other day basis? So, talk with the schools about that, but know for yourself, of course, you have to keep in mind your own work obligations and work schedule and who will be supervising the kids and when. So having an idea, so maybe today on Mondays, they have to be at this particular place. On Tuesdays, this is what's happening, but have a clear idea of what the week is going to look like for yourself and have it communicated to your child. Because again, predictability is really, 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 really important. When they're in the schools, they know that, maybe at 8 o'clock they have language arts and at on Mondays they have PE and, etc. So they have an idea of what the routine is. You want to try to create as much of that at home as possible so that they can be independent and sort of do things as they need to do, because they know it's Monday. That means that this is what's happening and this is what's next. Also, you want to, again, along with the school, try to figure out how to continue to develop those non-academic areas that are really important parts of child development. So it's not just the reading and writing and math, but how are you going to incorporate physical health development, creative development, their understanding of science and the world and all of those things? Is that going to be covered as part of the school curriculum at home, or is that something that you yourself are going to have to incorporate in some structured way? So in thinking about the routine that you're going to put into place, try to think of different activities that's going to develop other aspects of their learning outside of the reading, writing, math, etc. Because those parts are very important. That's part of what schools try to incorporate, and that's part of what you should try to incorporate at home. One of the other things I want to say about having like a routine is, especially for when it's not being structured online by schools and it's sort of at home, with somebody supervising, I think it's better to have it be a task-oriented routine rather than a time-oriented routine. Meaning that instead of saying, you're going to do some reading between 8 and 9, have some clear tasks that they need to accomplish before that they can move on to something else. So for instance, you'd say you have to write these 5 sentences and then you can do this. You have to do these math problems and then one of the ways it's more helpful to have it task oriented is that sometimes if it's time oriented, they might stare into space for a whole hour and said, oh, reading time is done. So instead you want to say, no, you have to do this thing and do it well, not just rush it off. You have to do this thing and accomplish this task before you move on to another task. So just in thinking about your routine, anytime that has to be more independent and self-directed, make sure it's a more task-oriented type of activity. So in all of this, of course, is trying to figure out how to work with schools about what is happening. Like I said, things are still very, well, I wouldn't say totally up in the air. I mean, we know that school is supposed to start on October 5th, if it hasn't already for some people. But at the same time, we know that things might change. We don't know in terms of the cases and how it goes. There might be a switch from in-person teaching to totally online. So you need to be in communication with the school about what their plans are, what their contingency plans are, what might change in the future. How are they going to make those changes? So make sure you have a clear idea from your school what their current schedule is going to look like and what might change and how they're planned to change it. That will help you with your planning and it'll help your child adjust to what's going along, what happens as we go along. We can't plan for everything, but we want to, as much as possible for children, make sure we have an idea of what might happen. An important part of talking with the schools is going to be communicating what your child needs as well. Again, you have a really good idea of where your child is at. If they might need a modified material from their teacher, they might need modified expectations. If your child is somebody who has struggles with writing, you might need to talk to the teacher about changing the expectations for them so that they're doing less of that rather than having to meet the same standard as other children. But that's a conversation that you need to have with the teacher, making sure that they understand where your child is coming from and what might need to change and how you can be making adjustments. And are there other material that they can provide particularly for your child? And just stay in the loop with the schools because we know things are changing. So whatever ways that they have of communicating, whether it's WhatsApp groups or email groups, make sure you're constantly staying in the loop so that you're aware of what the changes might be. So I just have some examples of what we've been talking about in terms of having visual schedules and visual routines and rules. This is just an example of what one student might be facing. They might be in school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, in which case you don't have to worry about what's happening on those days. They might be home on Wednesdays and Fridays and have access to the internet. So on those days, they might be doing online learning in the morning, and then you just have to structure some activities in the afternoon to help them figure out what's going on. And then on, for this child, maybe hypothetically, they have to stay by grandma's because there's nobody at home on Mondays and grandma doesn't have internet access. So thinking through on Mondays, then what are some of the things that you're going to have to put into place so that they can still be engaged in some academic activity. And, grandma will be aware of what the rules are for that and what the expectations are, and just putting that into place. So just for yourself, kind of think through the week. Where is this child going to be on which days? Who's going to be supervising on what needs? What do I need to plan ahead to kind of keep them engaged and making progress? Here's an idea. So again, visual reminders are really, really important and helpful. You might have a morning checklist for your child, and that would, be the same from day to day during the school day. They have to wake up at a certain time. You might have set ideas, set activities that they need to accomplish. Maybe they need to do a chore before they, get ready, or they need to make sure that they have the material ready that they need for school. It's a good idea to have rules for their online learning posted in their workspace or near their workspace. So, they have to be in their workspace at a certain time. They need to make sure that they stay seated during large group activity. They need to make sure that they don't access YouTube while this is going on and they're watching something else while school is going on. They need to ask, maybe you might put in a rule that they need to ask permission before breaks. Whatever works for your child and you need to think through what those rules are going to be, but also post it in a way that they can see and refer to, that you can refer to. Remember, you have to stay seated, or remember, you have to ask permission before you are allowed to leave the room. And then you might have a list of, afternoon activities that they need to do. Another way of kind of helping your child be structured is just writing in their notebook a list of tasks that they need to do for the next day. So you can sort of do that either in their notebooks, or you can, if you have a whiteboard or a chalkboard at home, you can quickly write what is the expectation in terms of task completions that they need to do for the next day. One of the things to think through, of course, as you figure out all of this, is what are some of the contingency plans that you're going to have to put into place, considering that things are changing often. What are your emergency support systems, and are your children aware of what those are? So in case you're not home, what is their plan? Whoever is supervising know what the emergency plans might be? What happens if all learning is online? What are you going to have to put into place, considering your own schedule and your own obligations? If it is that you won't have, it will be difficult for the child to have access to online learning, how can you make sure that they have activities that they need to do, and who's going to supervise them? And who can you collaborate? I mean, sometimes we might need to think through who can we be working with to help with supervision during this time, because if it is that we still have to balance work, maybe we need to collaborate with other parents, with people that we trust, relatives. We need to figure out who is going to be the support system to kind of help you figure out how to manage what's happening. So those are the ideas that I wanted to talk about today. The key ideas for me is definitely maintaining a positive interaction with your child is a very, very key foundational idea. And then how to communicate clear expectations and putting into place some routines. I'm going to ask Shalika just to lead this part of having you share what some of the things that we talked about, how that might apply to your lives. Or again, if you have comment, if you can always chat in the comments to to talk about what we've talked about so far.
Good morning again, everyone. So as we had said at the beginning of the session, we aim for this to be very interactive. So we've gone through the topics for today, and we're just encouraging you to ask questions, give us feedback, and really help us discuss what's going on with you in relation to the topics that we've covered so that we can better apply this to your specific situations? Is someone trying to speak now? Hello? Right, so is there any specific questions we have? Maybe we can start, Shauna, by speaking about having children with different ages within the home, you know, and how we can apply that. So several persons, Teresa and Kian, have adolescents, young toddlers, and middle-aged school-age children in the home. So let's look at, you know, discussing how we can really differentiate learning and differentiate expectations.
And the expectations too, because one of the challenges is going to be that we talked about having different expectations and being realistic, is that it's going to be very different what you expect from your 4-year-old from what your 15-year-old is going to be able to do. And sort of differentiating the expectations by age is going to be important, age and ability. Because I know Franklin mentioned having a child or with on the spectrum or dealing with children who might have different abilities. I mean, if you have a child with ADHD, for instance, those expectations are going to be completely different than if you have another child, you know what I mean? So kind of figuring out for different ages and different abilities what the expectations are going to be. And for some children, you're going to have to be so much more clear, meaning have more detailed expectations than for other children. You know, some children are highly dependent and under, so you can sort of give a broad sense of rules, make sure you have your homework done, this, and other children, you're going to need to be very, very specific. Have your pencil by your computer, have this checklist done. You know what I mean? Like you know your child best, and you know for some children you're going to have to be so much more detailed about what they need.
Okay, and in to some extent, when you have teenagers, they're better able to be independent and learn independence. So when you create a structure for them or you create checklists for them, you can allow them the flexibility to really take ownership of that and then support those skills. And a lot of the things that we'll be looking at next week will deal with supporting independence and personal responsibility. So with adolescents and kids who are like 13 and 12, they need a lot more support in terms of your allowance with them taking responsibility, whereas kids who are younger need the very structured, directed guidance in terms of what exactly is required of them, as well as, like Shauna was saying, kids with ADHD and other exceptionalities do need the structure to build in movement and build in free time, because if you think about it, when they're at school, they're moving and they're constantly engaged. Even if class is happening, they're engaged by their surroundings, by the kids beside them. So there's a lot more happening that they're internalizing in a school setting that would happen at home, right? So we need to consider all of those factors when we're building in a program for different ages. Selena brought up a very good point in terms of how do we create a routine when
things are not routine at home. And I know a lot of parents struggle of having to work from home, but your child is in a home and constantly asking for support. And how do you manage that? And that absolutely is a challenge depending on your child's age and how much you're able to get them to be independent, right? It's definitely a challenge, and it's trying to figure out how to get your work to some extent, how flexible you can be with work and changing those work times if possible, or maybe just you can only work with your child when you're not working, you know what I mean? So instead of expecting that they will be able to complete work while you're working, you might have to change that expectation altogether because it's not realistic.
Okay. Selena, do you have any feedback on what was said in terms of what more? Because there really are, in terms of what we're doing, the reality of it is that it's not going to be perfect. It's really not a perfect system in terms of just how much you have to offer and how much you can offer and how much your children need. So it's trying to find the best balance possible. So your daughter is 6, almost 7, and your 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds need a lot of attention on a regular basis, and then they need attention at school, and you have to fill the gap of her being able to go to and say, Miss, I need this assistance with this project. What may be an option, if you're friends with any of her classmates, you guys can trade off on which days they're at that person's home, in terms of that parent monitoring the school activity and you monitoring the school activity, and all of that is being said with the caveat that you know the person's adherence to, social protocols and how safe it is to do that. But in terms of when you have difficulty managing, it's very important to find a social support network that can help you get a break, because the reality of parenting in this pandemic is that you need a break. Some days it's good to have somewhere else for your child to go, where you can do what is necessary to be done and they can get what they need in terms of learning support and structure.
And then Selena, I'd say, one of the things that you're probably going to, if it is that your child is going to be home, and even if they're not in class, they're still going to come to you all the time. One of the first things that you're going to have to focus on in terms of rule setting or expectation setting is reinforcing that she can't come to you during work hours. And you're going to have to figure out a way to kind of clearly set that expectation for her and continually reinforce her with that. So rewarding her if she goes to somebody else, for instance, or setting yourself apart and sort of having a clear sort of, you can't come to me, but just some way of continually reinforcing that she can't come to you while you're working is going to be key. I'd say that's probably going to be your number one goal right now, is trying to figure out how to reinforce that rule for her.
In terms of, go ahead.
Sorry, no, Shalika, go.
In terms of the call center and the limitations that does present, and as well as limiting her coming to you, what you may be able to do is just build in like 5-minute blocks where you check in with her so that she sees that you're still there to support her, but she understands that it's just because of the time frame, it's limited. And communicating with kids in language they understand is very important, because she can understand that you're at work and there are obligations to your work. You just have to speak in terms that she really understands and reinforce why it's limited to some extent.
And use as much visuals as you can. Anyone else have any other comments or things they want to address? So as I mentioned, we really want this to be something that you try a strategy and then we talk about how it went. So one of the things there are 2 things that I'd like for you guys to practice over the next week. One of them, of course, is trying to have a regular practice time with, a regular positive interaction time with your child, and trying to figure out how to schedule that. We're actually going to send a worksheet, or a worksheet kind of goes over the points that we made today and how to kind of apply it practically in your life. We're going to send that by email. And one of the things is going to be looking at how your week can incorporate some regular positive time and seeing how that goes. It really can make a huge difference, that one-on-one interaction, short time, but regular. And the other thing is to sort of just try to sketch out maybe a master timetable to see if you can, as much as you can, what your week should look like. And those things will be in the resource sheet that we'll send to you soon. Any other thoughts or comments that anybody wants to make before we close out? Either by chat, or you feel free to unmute and say something if you want as well. or you can just type it in the chat.
May I?
Yes.
Teresa here.
Hi, Teresa.
I'm looking at it, and honestly, I know the children need this support. You know, we need to really help them through this time. I'd posted something in the group, but I had sent it to the host. But I don't know, it wasn't mentioned. But the thing is, as parents, a lot of us too need support. I mean, mentally,
Seriously.
psychologically, seriously, it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they are now, most of the parents are now faced with a situation where, yes, um, you know, the whole teaching thing, you know, you normally send them out, but now you are faced with sitting down
Yeah.
at home with them, especially the small ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you know, well, I don't know what form the schools are gonna take on now in terms of dispensing the work to the students and so on, or engaging them. But you know, back from March coming up, it was really a challenge. And you're looking at some parents who will have to work from home, and you know, like one of the parents just mentioned, you know, being on task, and then the student is there, you know, really
Right.
have any other support system, and you have yours to do, and you know, it's really a challenge.
It
And
is a
so
challenge.
yes, as we go along, you know, parents as well as students
No,
need
absolutely. I think one
need
of the
the
things that,
support.
sorry, Teresa, thank you so much for sharing. One of the things that I really want to, when we talk about the session
Yes.
on managing emotions, is I really do want to talk about how for ourselves we can manage the stress that we're under, which is an important part of how to help our kids manage stress and emotions, because we ourselves are stressed, and unless we figure out how to do it for ourselves, it's going to be hard to teach our children how to do it. So I absolutely know. And the other things that I want to say is that I really want to emphasize that we need to be realistic about our expectations. It's a lot of change. It's a lot of change. And particularly if you're trying to work from home and supervise children at home, it is going to be a challenge. And that is the reality of it. There's no way that we can expect things to be how they were. And we're going to have to figure out how to sort of accept that to some extent. We're going to try to put into place things that can help, but at the same time, we need to accept that things have changed and things are difficult. And until we have a handle on this, on COVID-19, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, and kind of accepting that to some extent, that it's going to be a little bit difficult. But hopefully we can think about it more and come up with some ideas that we can share with each other about how to help to manage, particularly at home, working from home and supervising kids at home dilemma. Anything you want to add, Shalika, before we close out?
Yeah, definitely that, especially because you, Teresa, and Kian, you have 4-year-olds and a 1-year-old between both of you, and there's just no way around attention for a child that age. So it is going to be, I suggest rather, it is going to be a lot of management of your own time, because you have to give time to 4-year-olds and 1-year-olds. And if you can really scour through a social support network to see, because I know a lot of us use daycare and have when we have to go to work, and know that's not a system that we really can use. So it is going to be building in activities for them, very engaging activities. And I would honestly say, as much as you can tire out kids, so find movement activities within the home that are safe, that tire them out. Kian, you have all boys, tire them out. Usually we'd send them to football or like camps or stuff in the summer, but we have to figure out really creative ways to, one, activities are a good way to build learning, and movement activities really help register actual learning and motor development. So finding activities in the home where they can tire themselves out so that they can take a nap, so that you can get a break, will be creative and fun and engaging for them, and also useful. for you. Was one of the suggestions. Shauna, you would have to check the comments in the host chat because I have the group chat.
Yeah,
okay. As well as in terms of going forward, like Shauna said, you will be getting a couple documents today. I'm going to send them out shortly after the session. And so these documents, we're really encouraging for you to go through them as well as implement the strategies in the primary document that we're sending you. I mean, we're gonna call it homework, but it's not really homework. It's just ways for you to reinforce the skills that we're talking about here and see if it makes your life easier. And if it doesn't, you can come back next week, definitely, and tell us, what was hard about it, what didn't work about it, so we can see, can we adjust it to make it more effective for you, right? Okay. And in terms of like we said, this is a 4-part series. So if you haven't registered for the other workshops in the series, we encourage you to do so today. Yes, young children get bored very easily, unfortunately. So we can try and find more. We have resources attached that we're going to send as well that can give you some ideas. One of them is very comprehensive in terms of the number of ideas that you can implement for creative learning, so that might be useful for you. That's it. Unless anyone else has any comments. If you haven't shared, we encourage you to do so right now, because we're here to help. So we'll give you like another minute or half an hour, sorry, not half an hour, 30 seconds or a minute to just share if you have anything to share.
This morning, and again, if you have any last comments that you want to make in the chat, absolutely feel free to do so. Next week, as we mentioned in the beginning, for those who weren't here, Shalika is going to lead a session on how to foster independence in children. And at the same time, I think during the week, we'll definitely think more about the activities that you can put into place to kind of keep kids occupied. Like Shalika says, we have some resources that we're going to share right now, and as much as anybody finds, we can share it with each other and kind of help each other out as we go along. But I really want to thank you guys for joining us this morning.
Yeah, we also, everyone is here right now, and if you want to, you can take it on yourself to form a support network with each other. So if you want to exchange like email addresses or anything like that, to talk to other people going through the same thing you're going through and share ideas about what you've been doing and get ideas what they've been doing, as well as with what we're giving you, we encourage that as well. We really want this 4-week session to be as a form of support, and the easiest way to do that is for everybody to connect and exchange ideas. So we'll just leave it open for another minute or so, and then we'll see you guys back here next week at 10.
Remember to register. I think we're going to close it off here. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this week. Next week, we'll be doing Fostering Independence, Tuesday at 10 o'clock. I look forward to seeing everyone. Please try the practice ideas. Just try it and see how it goes, and let us know next week and see how, give us some feedback on how it went. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye. Mm-hmm.